I'm Molly, 27, and I always believed family would be there in emergencies. Then came that rainy night and the car crash that left me needing urgent surgery. While I lay there in excruciating pain, my father's text message appeared on my phone. "Can't this wait? We're busy right now." In that moment, everything I thought I knew about family shattered. Thank goodness for my grandfather who rushed to my side when my parents wouldn't. Before I start my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when those closest to you let you down. I moved back to Portland 2 years ago after landing a position as a graphic designer at a growing marketing firm. The job offered creative freedom and a decent salary enough for me to rent a cozy one-bedroom apartment downtown. Moving back to my hometown meant being closer to my parents, James and Catherine, something I thought would strengthen our relationship. My father built his reputation as one of the city's most successful corporate attorneys. His name appeared on a prestigious law firm downtown, and he specialized in defending major corporations in high-profile cases. My mother worked as a top-selling real estate agent, focusing exclusively on luxury properties in Portland's most affluent neighborhoods. Their careers demanded long hours, frequent business trips, and constant networking events. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American success story. But success came with a price I paid throughout my childhood. I learned early that my piano recitals, soccer games, and school plays ranked low on my parents' priority list. There was always an important client, a closing deal, or a networking dinner that took precedence. I still remember my 12th birthday when they called from the airport to tell me they needed to catch a flight for an unexpected business opportunity. My grandfather Walter was the one who brought the cake and sang happy birthday with me. "They work hard to give you opportunities, sweetheart," Grandpa Walter would explain whenever he saw the disappointment in my eyes. "Some people just show love differently." I believed that explanation for years, making excuses for their absence. When I graduated high school as valedictorian and my father left halfway through my speech for a phone call, I told myself it must have been an important client. When they missed my college graduation because of a real estate convention in Las Vegas, I reasoned they needed those connections to succeed. I had perfected the art of disguising disappointment as understanding. My grandfather Walter, my father's dad, filled the parental void they left. After my grandmother passed when I was 9, he became a constant presence in my life. He attended every school event, taught me to drive, and celebrated every milestone. A retired high school history teacher, Walter, had a gentle wisdom about him that made me feel safe. He lived just 20 minutes from my apartment in a small house filled with books and memories. "Family shows up," he'd tell me, "not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's not." Since moving back to Portland, tensions with my parents had been building. My mother asked me to design new marketing materials for her real estate business, assuming I would do it for free. When I explained my freelance rates, she acted offended. "After all we've done for you," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "I thought family helped family." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me, but I stayed professional, offering a family discount instead of free work. She declined and hired someone else, then mentioned at every opportunity how much she had to pay because I refused to help. My father was more subtle in his manipulation. He'd call occasionally not to check on me, but to mention colleagues whose children had become successful doctors or lawyers. The unspoken comparison hung in our conversations like an unwelcome guest. The week before the accident, I made one more attempt to strengthen our relationship. I invited them to dinner at a new restaurant downtown, making reservations weeks in advance for Friday at 7. At 6:30, my mother texted, "Something came up with clients, need to reschedule." No apology, no further explanation. I sat alone at that table for 4, telling the waitstaff my dinner companions were running late, until eventually ordering a meal for 1. As I walked home that night, I wondered why I kept expecting different results from the same people. Part of me still craved their approval, their attention, while another part recognized the toxic patterns that defined our relationship. I had no idea that within a week those patterns would reach their breaking point in a way none of us could have anticipated. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in October. Rain poured from a darkened sky, creating a shimmering layer on the asphalt as I drove home from work. Traffic moved slowly along the slick road's headlights, reflecting off puddles like scattered gems. I remember changing the radio station when it happened. A pickup truck hydroplaned through a red light, slamming into the driver's side of my sedan. The impact sent my car spinning across the intersection before crashing into a light pole. Everything moved in terrifying slow motion, the shattering glass, the crushing metal, the violent jolt as my body strained against the seatbelt. When the spinning stopped, pain exploded through my left side. My vision blurred as warm blood trickled down my face from a gash on my forehead. The airbag deflated against my chest, leaving me struggling for breath. Through the cracked windshield, distorted figures rushed toward my car, their voices sounding distant and muffled. "Don't move!" a woman shouted, rain soaking her hair as she peered through the broken window. "Help is coming." Another bystander, an older man in a raincoat, called 911 while keeping his free hand pressed against my car door. "Stay with us," he urged. "Ambulance is on the way. What's your name?" "Molly." I managed to whisper, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. "You're going to be okay, Molly," he assured me, though the concern in his eyes suggested otherwise. "Just stay awake." The ambulance arrived with wailing sirens and flashing lights that pulsed against the rain-drenched scene. Paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing my neck with a brace before carefully extracting me from the mangled vehicle. The pain intensified with each movement, causing black spots to dance across my vision. Multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding, decreased breath sounds on the left, one paramedic reported into a radio as they loaded me into the ambulance. Conscious, but disoriented. During the ride to Portland Memorial Hospital, a paramedic named Steve kept me conscious by asking simple questions while checking my vitals. I remember the ceiling of the ambulance blurring as tears mixed with blood and rain on my face. The pain in my abdomen grew more intense, a sharp stabbing sensation that made each breath an exercise in agony. The emergency room erupted into activity when we arrived. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, cutting away my clothes, attaching monitors, inserting IVs, and calling out medical terms I couldn't fully comprehend in my state. A doctor with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair leaned over me. "Molly, I'm Dr. Winters. You've suffered significant trauma in the accident. We need to get some scans immediately to check for internal bleeding. Do you understand?" I nodded weakly, wincing as they transferred me to another bed. The CT scan confirmed their fears. I had a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding that required immediate surgery. The surgical team was already being assembled, but there was one critical issue. "Molly," Dr. Winters explained, "the surgery we need to perform carries some risks. Given your condition, we need a family member to consent to the procedure. Is there someone we can call?" Through waves of pain, I provided my parents' contact information. A nurse named Angela tried calling both numbers multiple times, leaving increasingly urgent messages, while the medical team worked to stabilize me. "Neither one is answering," Angela reported with a frown. "Is there anyone else we can try?" By this point, the pain medication they'd administered was making it difficult to focus, but even in my hazy state, I felt a familiar disappointment spreading through my chest. I directed them to try texting my father, who always responded faster to texts than calls. 20 agonizing minutes passed before my phone pinged with a response. Angela read the message aloud. "Can't this wait? We're busy right now, at an important dinner with clients." The room fell silent. Angela exchanged glances with Dr. Winters, whose expression tightened. Even through my pain-induced fog, I registered the shock on their faces. "He can't be serious," Dr. Winters muttered before addressing me directly. "Molly, we really need this consent. Your condition is serious. The bleeding could become life-threatening if we don't operate soon." Tears spilled down my face as the physical pain merged with a deeper emotional wound. "Try my grandfather," I whispered. "Walter Harrison!" Angela quickly made the call, explaining the situation to my grandfather. Unlike my parents, Walter answered on the second ring. I could hear his voice through the phone, clear and urgent, asking questions about my condition and location. "He's on his way," Angela reported, squeezing my hand. "Says he'll be here in 15 minutes or less." Those 15 minutes stretched like hours as the medical team continued monitoring my declining vitals. The pain in my abdomen intensified despite the medication, and the doctors exchanged increasingly concerned glances. BP dropping to 90/60, a nurse called out. We might not have time to wait, Dr. Winters murmured. Just then, the emergency room doors burst open and my grandfather rushed in. At 72, Walter Harrison moved with the urgency of a much younger man, his normally neatly combed silver hair disheveled, his khaki pants and blue sweater still bearing drops of rain. "Where's my granddaughter?" he demanded, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Molly?" His face paled at the sight of me connected to tubes and monitors, but he quickly composed himself and hurried to my side, taking my hand in his warm, steady grip. "I'm here, sweetheart," he assured me, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm here now." Walter's arrival transformed the emergency room atmosphere from tense uncertainty to focused action. While the medical team prepared the necessary consent forms, my grandfather leaned close to me, his familiar scent of old books and mint bringing momentary comfort amid the chaos. "Where are James and Catherine?" he asked, looking around the room as if expecting my parents to materialize from behind a curtain. Dr. Winters, who had been reviewing my chart, looked up with barely concealed disapproval. "We reached her father by text. He said they were busy at dinner with clients and asked if it could wait." I will never forget the expression that crossed my grandfather's face. Powerful, controlled rage mingled with profound disappointment. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, focusing instead on me. "Don't you worry about them right now," he said softly, stroking my hair away from the bandage on my forehead. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Walter signed the consent forms with a steady hand, asking detailed questions about the procedure risks and recovery process. Dr. Winters explained that my spleen had ruptured in the impact and was causing significant internal bleeding. "The surgery involves removing the damaged spleen," Dr. Winters said. "It's a serious procedure, but Molly is young and otherwise healthy. Our main concern is addressing the bleeding quickly." As they prepared to take me to surgery, Walter held my hand tightly. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised. "I'm not leaving this hospital until you do." I tried to smile through my pain and fear. "I'm scared, Grandpa." I admitted the words barely audible. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. "But you're stronger than you know. You always have been." He leaned down to kiss my forehead. "I love you, Molly, more than anything in this world." As the anesthesia began to take effect, memories flooded my mind. Walter teaching me to ride a bicycle in the park when I was 7. Walter sitting front row at my middle school play when I had only 3 lines. Walter helping me move into my college dorm while my parents were at a conference in Chicago. He had always been there, filling the void my parents left with his unwavering presence. The surgery lasted 4 hours. I later learned that complications arose when they discovered more extensive bleeding than initially detected. Throughout it all, Walter remained in the waiting room, making calls to update my friends, speaking with doctors, and according to the nursing staff, refusing multiple suggestions to go home and rest. When I finally awoke in the recovery room, groggy and disoriented from anesthesia, the first thing I saw was my grandfather dozing in an uncomfortable chair pulled right next to my bed. Despite his own discomfort, he had positioned himself so that his hand rested near mine, ready to offer comfort the moment I woke. "Grandpa?" I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube. He startled awake immediately, relief washing over his tired face. "There she is," he said gently, taking my hand in his. "Welcome back, sweetheart." A nurse entered to check my vitals, smiling warmly at us. "Your grandfather hasn't left this spot for a minute," she told me. "Not even for coffee. We had to bring it to him." "Stubborn old man," I managed to joke weakly. "Just like my stubborn granddaughter," Walter replied with a watery smile. As I became more alert, I noticed the conspicuous absence of any other family members. Reading my thoughts, Walter sighed. "I called them," he said quietly. "Left messages about the surgery, told them it was serious." He hesitated, clearly weighing whether to share more in my fragile state. "They haven't called back yet." I closed my eyes, absorbing this information. Even by my parents' standards, this absence felt like crossing a line I hadn't known existed. A line that once crossed might change everything. The next few days in the hospital passed in a blur of pain medication, doctor visits, and sleep. Walter remained constantly by my side, sleeping in the reclining chair, despite my protests that he should go home to rest. He only left briefly to shower and change clothes, timing his absences for when I was sleeping. "Your grandfather is something special," commented Dr. Winters during morning rounds. "We don't see that kind of dedication often enough." "He's always been there for me," I replied, glancing at Walter, who was arranging the flowers that had arrived from my coworkers. "And I always will be," he added without looking up. Dr. Winters explained that the surgery had been successful, but recovery would take time. I had lost my spleen, which meant I would need to be more cautious about infections in the future. Physical activity would be limited for at least 6 weeks, and I would need assistance during the initial weeks at home. "I've already arranged everything," Walter announced before I could worry. "I'll stay at your apartment until you're back on your feet. My neighbor's collecting my mail and watering my plants." When discharge day arrived 5 days after the accident, there was still no word from my parents beyond a single text from my mother asking if I was feeling better, without any acknowledgement of the surgery or their absence. Walter helped the nurse settle me into a wheelchair, collected my prescriptions, and carefully helped me into his car for the drive to my apartment. "I set up the guest room for myself," he explained as we drove slowly through Portland's rainy streets. "Made sure the path to your bathroom is clear. We'll get through this together, Molly." For the first time since the accident, I felt tears spring to my eyes that had nothing to do with physical pain. The contrast between my grandfather's devotion and my parents' indifference had never been more stark or more painful. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to express the depth of my gratitude and love. Walter reached across to squeeze my hand gently. "That's what family does," he said simply. "The real kind, anyway." The first week home from the hospital proved more challenging than I had anticipated. Simple tasks like showering or walking to the kitchen became exhausting ordeals that left me breathless and shaky. The surgical wound throbbed constantly despite pain medication, and sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by discomfort when I moved unconsciously. Through it all, Walter transformed into the caretaker I never knew I needed. He created a medication schedule, prepared simple meals that tempted my non-existent appetite, and helped me manage the shower and bathroom visits without sacrificing my dignity. At 72, he moved more slowly than he once did, but his steady presence never wavered. "You don't have to do all this," I protested one afternoon as he changed the sheets on my bed while I rested on the couch. "And you don't have to keep thanking me," he replied with a smile. "This is what we do for people we love." His simple statement hung in the air between us, highlighting the absence of those who should have been there, but weren't. Friends and coworkers visited regularly, bringing food, flowers, and company. My boss Diane came by on the third day, assuring me that my job was secure and that I should take all the time I needed to recover. "The team sends their love," she said, setting down a gift basket filled with books, tea, and comfort items. "Don't even think about work until you're 100%. She glanced around the apartment, noticing the obvious absence. "Your parents out of town?" Walter, who was preparing tea in the kitchen, became very interested in finding the right mugs. "They're busy," I replied, the familiar excuse tasting bitter on my tongue. "Work stuff." Diane's expression shifted subtly, but she didn't press further. After she left, Walter brought me chamomile tea and sat in the armchair across from the couch. "You don't have to make excuses for them anymore, you know," he said gently. "Not to others and not to yourself." I stared into my teacup, watching the amber liquid ripple. "It's easier than explaining the truth." "And what is the truth, Molly?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer I wasn't ready to articulate. "I don't know," I finally whispered. "That's the problem." 2 weeks into my recovery, Walter suggested I might benefit from speaking with someone professional. "You've been through physical trauma," he pointed out, "but there's emotional trauma here too." With his encouragement, I started weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Reed, who specialized in family dynamics and trauma. At first, I found it difficult to discuss my parents without automatically defending their behavior. They work really hard, I explained during our first session. They've always been busy. And yet your grandfather, who I understand is 72, managed to drop everything immediately when you needed him. Dr. Reed observed without judgment. Why do you think that is? These gentle but direct questions began to chip away at the protective shell I'd built around my parents' behavior. Over the following weeks, I started recognizing patterns of emotional neglect that had shaped my entire life, from seeking perfectionism to earn their attention to minimizing my own needs to avoid being a burden. Meanwhile, my mother had begun sending occasional texts that carefully avoided mentioning the accident or their absence during my emergency. "Hope you're feeling better," and "we should have lunch when things calm down," appeared on my phone like messages from a casual acquaintance rather than a mother whose daughter had nearly died. I showed these messages to Dr. Reed during our third session. "What do you notice about these texts?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. They don't acknowledge what happened. There's no mention of the surgery or their absence. No apology. I paused. It's like they're pretending everything is normal. And how does that make you feel? Angry. I admitted the word feeling dangerous but liberating. Really angry. 4 weeks after the accident, Walter and I settled into a gentle routine. My strength was returning gradually, and I could manage most basic tasks without assistance. We took short walks around the neighborhood, increasing the distance as my stamina improved. On these walks, Walter shared stories about my father's childhood that gave me new insight into my parents. "Your father was always ambitious," he explained as we slowly circled the park near my apartment. "From the time he was little, he wanted to be the best at everything he tried. His mother and I encouraged excellence, but tried to teach him that relationships matter more than achievements." He sighed, watching a family with young children playing by the pond. "Somewhere along the way, he forgot that second part. When he met your mother in law school, they seemed to fuel that ambition in each other. Two brilliant people who saw life as a series of accomplishments rather than connections." "Were they always this way?" I asked, pausing to rest on a bench. "Even when I was little?" Walter considered the question carefully. "There were moments," he said finally, "brief periods when they seemed to understand what they were missing, but then work would pull them back in, and those moments became rarer over time." As we approached the 3-month mark after my accident, I was nearly fully recovered physically. The surgical scar had faded from angry red to a softer pink, and I could move without constant awareness of my missing spleen. Walter had returned to his own home 2 weeks earlier, though he still visited daily and called each morning and night. I had resumed work part-time, grateful for the understanding environment Diane had cultivated. My therapy sessions with Dr. Reed continued, focusing now on establishing boundaries for when I eventually needed to face my parents. "You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with them going forward," Dr. Reed emphasized. "Your needs and feelings matter." I never expected the confrontation would happen quite as suddenly as it did, or that it would trigger a sequence of events that would force my parents to face the consequences of their choices in such a dramatic way. The confrontation occurred exactly 3 months and 2 days after my accident. I had just returned from physical therapy, my muscles pleasantly tired from the exercises designed to restore my full strength. Walter had driven me and was preparing lunch in my kitchen when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," he called, setting down the knife he'd been using to slice tomatoes for our sandwiches. I heard the door open, followed by a moment of tense silence. "James, Catherine." My grandfather's voice carried down the hallway, suddenly cool and formal. My parents stood in the doorway, looking exactly as they always did. My father in a tailored suit, despite it being Saturday, my mother in designer casual wear with not a hair out of place. My mother held a small gift bag with tissue paper protruding from the top. "Dad," my father acknowledged Walter with a nod before looking past him. "Is Molly here?" I stepped into view, my heart pounding in my chest. For 3 months, I had alternated between dreading and anticipating this moment. "Hi," my mother said brightly, as if we had seen each other just last week for our regular coffee date rather than not at all since my life-threatening accident. You look good. Almost back to normal. Walter stepped aside reluctantly, allowing them to enter. My father glanced around the apartment, noting the medical supplies still visible on the coffee table and the prescription bottles lined up on the kitchen counter. We've been so busy, my mother continued, holding out the gift bag. But we wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I accepted the bag automatically, not bothering to look inside. I nearly died, I said quietly. A flash of discomfort crossed my father's face. Well, clearly that's an exaggeration, he replied, his tone dismissive. You're fine now. Walter made a sound somewhere between a cough and a growl, but remained silent when I caught his eye. This was my conversation to lead. My mother settled gracefully onto my couch, her expression perfectly arranged to convey polite concern. We were at that dinner with the Hendersons, she explained as if this clarified everything. You remember James? They were considering listing their vacation property with me, a $3 million deal. It was extremely unfortunate timing, my father added, loosening his tie slightly. These things happen. Things happen. I repeated slowly, the words feeling surreal in my mouth. I was in a car accident, needed emergency surgery, and you couldn't be bothered to come to the hospital because you were at dinner. Now, Molly. My mother started, her tone shifting to the one she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. You know how important those connections are for our business, and you were obviously fine. Obviously fine. I felt heat rising in my face. I lost my spleen. I nearly bled to death internally while waiting for someone to consent to my surgery. I spent 5 days in the hospital and weeks recovering, and you didn't visit once. The hospital should have tried harder to reach us, my father countered, his lawyer instincts kicking in. One text hardly constitutes due diligence on their part. Walter, who had been leaning against the wall observing, straightened. They called multiple times, left messages, and your response to the text was, and I quote, "Can't this wait? We're busy right now." My father's face reddened. You're taking that out of context. We didn't have all the information. You didn't need all the information, I said, my voice trembling with emotion I'd been containing for months. You needed to know your daughter was in the hospital after a car accident. That should have been enough. You've always been prone to dramatics, Molly. My mother sighed, glancing at her watch. I'm sure it seemed very serious to you, but hospitals tend to overstate these things. Something snapped inside me at her words. I walked to the desk in the corner of my living room, pulled out a folder, and returned to stand directly in front of them. This is my medical file, I said, removing several pages. This details the extent of my internal bleeding. This one explains how close I came to hypovolemic shock, which can be fatal. And this, I continued, pulling out a final document, is my discharge summary, which lists my grandfather as my next of kin and emergency contact since my parents were, quote, unavailable and unresponsive. My parents stared at the documents, momentarily silenced by the clinical evidence of their failure. The hospital clearly mishandled the situation, my father finally said, slipping back into his defensive legal tone. If they had made more of an effort to explain the severity— Stop it! I interrupted, my voice louder than I'd intended. Just stop making excuses. For once in your lives, can you admit that you failed me, that you put a business dinner above your own daughter's life? That's not fair, Molly, my mother protested, tears appearing in her eyes that I couldn't help but notice didn't fall, never risking her perfect mascara. We've given you everything, the best schools, opportunities, connections. Everything except yourselves, I finished for her. Everything except what actually mattered. My father stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger or perhaps shame. I won't be spoken to this way in by my own daughter. You have no idea the sacrifices we've made for this family. Sacrifices, Walter interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Is that what you call it, James? Because from where I stand, the only person who's sacrificed anything is Molly. Her childhood, her expectations, her right to have parents who show up when it matters most. Stay out of this, Dad, my father snapped. This is between us and Molly. He earned the right to be part of this conversation when he was the one who signed my surgery consent form, I said quietly. When he slept in a hospital chair for 5 nights. When he took care of me for weeks during my recovery while you couldn't be bothered to even call. My mother stood now too, adjusting her designer handbag on her shoulder. I think you're being incredibly ungrateful considering everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, genuinely curious what she would say. We've supported your career choices even when you decided to go into that graphic design field instead of law or medicine, she replied, as if this represented extraordinary parental generosity. I laughed, the sound hollow and without humor. Supported. You've criticized my career at every turn. Dad regularly sends me articles about graphic designers getting law degrees as a "thought you might find this interesting" hint. And Mom, you expected me to do thousands of dollars of work for you for free, then got offended when I asked to be paid for my professional skills. That's different, my mother insisted. That's family. No, I said firmly. Family shows up. Family puts people before profits. Family doesn't send texts asking if emergency surgery can wait because they're at an important dinner. My father's face had grown increasingly red during our exchange. He loosened his tie further and wiped sweat from his forehead. This is ridiculous, he muttered, completely blown out of proportion. Walter took a step forward, concern crossing his features. James, are you feeling all right? My father waved him off impatiently. I'm fine, just frustrated by this childish display. He turned back to me. When you're ready to have an adult conversation without all this emotional manipulation, let us know. But as he spoke, he winced, pressing a hand to his chest. His breathing became noticeably labored, and he reached for the wall to steady himself. James, my mother asked, her voice rising with sudden alarm. I said I'm fine, he insisted, though his face had drained of color. Just need to sit for a minute. He lowered himself heavily onto the couch, loosening his tie completely now. Walter moved to his side, immediately, professional concern overriding personal conflict. James, are you having chest pain? My father hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. It's probably just indigestion, he managed, though his grimace suggested otherwise. How long? Walter demanded. Started during the argument, my father admitted. Getting worse. I was already reaching for my phone. I'm calling an ambulance. Don't be ridiculous, my father protested weakly. I don't need... His words cut off as he clutched his chest more firmly, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. 911, I said into the phone, watching my father's face contort with pain. I need an ambulance immediately. My father is having chest pains and difficulty breathing. Possible heart attack. As I relayed our address to the dispatcher, a bizarre sense of déjà vu washed over me. 3 months ago, I had been the one in medical distress while my father was too busy to respond. Now our roles were dramatically reversed, and despite everything, I found myself moving instinctively to help him. They're on their way, I told him, kneeling beside the couch. Try to stay calm and breathe slowly. My mother had begun to panic, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. James, look at me. You're going to be fine. She turned to me, suddenly desperate. Do something. Walter had already gone to get a glass of water and the aspirin from my medicine cabinet. Have him chew this, he instructed, handing me the pill. It might help if it's cardiac related. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on any of us as we waited for the ambulance to arrive. 3 months after they had been too busy to come to the hospital for me, I was now the one helping my father during his medical emergency without a moment's hesitation. When the paramedics arrived minutes later, I answered their questions calmly, providing my father's age, medical history, and the onset of symptoms. As they prepared to transport him, my mother looked completely lost, her hands shaking as she tried to gather her purse. I'll drive you to the hospital. Walter offered, his voice gentle despite everything. Molly, are you coming? I looked at my father on the stretcher, oxygen mask covering his face, and nodded. I'll meet you there. The ambulance cut through Saturday afternoon traffic sirens wailing as my father was rushed to the same hospital where I had undergone surgery 3 months earlier. I followed in my car with Walter driving my mother in his vehicle behind me. The strange role reversal wasn't lost on me as I found myself unexpectedly calm in a crisis that had my mother falling apart. At Portland Memorial Hospital, the emergency room team moved efficiently, wheeling my father away for immediate assessment while a nurse directed us to the waiting area. My mother paced nervously, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "This is a nightmare," she muttered repeatedly, checking her phone. "I need to call the Hendersons. We were supposed to show them properties tomorrow." I stared at her in disbelief. "Mom, Dad might be having a heart attack and you're worried about work." She looked up, genuinely confused by my reaction. "Life doesn't just stop, Molly. These are million-dollar listings." Walter placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, silently encouraging me to let it go. We sat together in the waiting room while my mother made calls, her voice shifting seamlessly between concerned wife describing a minor health scare and professional real estate agent rescheduling appointments. After 45 minutes that felt like hours, Dr. Winters, the same doctor who had overseen my care, approached us. I felt a jolt of recognition, and he nodded slightly to acknowledge our previous connection. "Mrs. Harrison," he addressed my mother, who quickly ended her call. "Yes, that's me. How is James?" "Your husband has experienced a mild myocardial infarction, what we commonly call a heart attack," Dr. Winters explained. "We've performed an EKG and blood tests that confirm this diagnosis. The good news is we caught it relatively early and he's stable." My mother pressed a hand to her chest. "Thank goodness. So he can come home today." Dr. Winters shook his head. "No, Mrs. Harrison. Your husband will need to remain hospitalized for several days. We're preparing him for a cardiac catheterization to determine if there are blockages in his coronary arteries that need treatment." "Days," she repeated, looking stunned. "But I have 3 showings on Monday and the charity gala on Tuesday, Doctor." Winter's expression remained professionally neutral, though I detected a flicker of the same disapproval he'd shown when reading my father's text months ago. "Your husband's health must be the priority right now," he said firmly. "The procedure will be performed this evening, and depending on what we find, he may need stents placed to open blocked arteries." "Can we see him?" I asked. "Yes, but briefly. He needs to rest before the procedure." Dr. Winters hesitated, then added, "He's asked specifically to speak with you, Molly." This surprised me. I exchanged glances with Walter, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll go with your mother to complete the admission paperwork," he offered. Following a nurse to the cardiac unit, I found my father in a private room connected to monitors that beeped steadily. He looked smaller, somehow vulnerable in the hospital gown with wires attached to his chest. His normally perfectly styled hair lay flat against his forehead, and without his suit he seemed diminished. "Dad," I said softly from the doorway. He turned toward my voice, offering a weak smile. "Molly, come in." I approached cautiously, taking the chair beside his bed. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the beeping monitors filling the silence. "Quite a turn of events," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "Not how I expected today to go." "I know the feeling," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. He winced, and for a moment I worried his pain had returned, but then I realized it was my words that had caused his reaction. "I suppose I deserved that," he admitted quietly. We sat in silence for another moment before he spoke again. "The doctor says I'm lucky. Could have been much worse if I hadn't received prompt attention." He paused, looking directly at me for perhaps the first time in years. "If you hadn't called the ambulance immediately, if you hadn't stayed calm and helped me despite everything." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to point out the stark contrast between his emergency and how he had handled mine, but something in his expression stopped me. "I may have made some mistakes, Molly," he said, each word seeming to cost him considerable effort. "Today has been illuminating in many ways." It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from my father, it was unprecedented. Before I could respond, a nurse entered to check his vitals and prepare him for transport to the catheterization lab. "They're ready for you, Mr. Harrison," she announced, adjusting his IV line. She turned to me. "You can wait in the family area. The procedure usually takes about an hour." As they prepared to wheel him out, my father reached for my hand. His grip was weaker than I remembered, his skin cool to the touch. "We should talk more," he said. "After all this is over." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As they took him away, I remained standing in the empty room, processing the subtle shift that had occurred between us. In the waiting area, I found my mother on the phone again, while Walter sat patiently nearby. She was speaking with a client, explaining that a minor family situation might require rescheduling. Not once did she mention that her husband was undergoing a cardiac procedure. "Mom," I said firmly after she ended the call, "put the phone away." She looked startled by my tone. "I'm just managing the situation, Molly. Someone has to think about the practical aspects." "The practical aspect is that Dad is having a heart attack and needs his family to be present," I replied evenly. "Everything else can wait." "You don't understand how these things work," she insisted. "Clients don't wait. Opportunities don't wait." "No," I agreed. "They don't. Just like emergency surgery doesn't wait even when parents are too busy at dinner." Her face flushed, but before she could respond, Dr. Winters returned with news about the procedure. The catheterization had revealed 2 significant blockages in my father's coronary arteries. They had successfully placed stents to restore blood flow, but he would need to make significant lifestyle changes to prevent future cardiac events. "He'll need to stay in the hospital for at least 3 days for monitoring," Dr. Winters explained. "After discharge, he should avoid stressful situations, follow a heart-healthy diet, and participate in cardiac rehabilitation." 3 days, my mother repeated, seeming more concerned about this than the medical details. "What about his cases? His clients?" I stepped forward. "I'll help arrange his care at home," I told Dr. Winters. "Will he need assistance after discharge?" "Yes, initially," the doctor confirmed. "Someone should stay with him for at least the first week. He'll need help with medications, meal preparation, and transportation to follow up appointments." My mother looked increasingly overwhelmed. "I have the Westbrook listing presentation on Thursday," she murmured almost to herself. "And the coastal property viewings all weekend." I made a decision then, surprising even myself. "I'll manage Dad's recovery care," I announced. "I've recently been through something similar, so I understand what's needed." Walter raised an eyebrow but said nothing. My mother looked simultaneously relieved and uncomfortable. "That's very helpful of you, Molly," she said carefully. "Yes," I agreed, meeting her gaze directly. "That's what family does. They show up when needed, even when it's inconvenient." The pointed comment wasn't lost on her. She glanced away suddenly, very interested in her perfectly manicured nails. Over the next 3 days, I divided my time between the hospital work and preparing my parents' house for my father's return. Walter helped immensely, accompanying me to purchase medical supplies and groceries, and assisting with rearranging furniture to accommodate my father's temporary limitations. My father's demeanor had changed noticeably during his hospital stay. The brush with mortality seemed to have stripped away some of his usual defensive armor. During my visits, we had brief but meaningful conversations about my recovery, my work, and occasionally tentatively about our strained relationship. "Your grandfather says you've been seeing a therapist," he mentioned on the second day, surprising me with his awareness. "I have," I confirmed. "Dr. Reed. She's been helping me process everything." "Everything meaning the accident, or everything meaning us?" he asked perceptively. I considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "Both." He nodded slowly. "Probably overdue." My mother, meanwhile, continued to orbit the situation rather than fully engage with it. She visited briefly between appointments, always impeccably dressed, always with her phone in hand. She arranged for a cleaning service to prepare the house but delegated all actual care planning to me. On the day of my father's discharge, I arrived at the hospital to find him dressed and sitting in a chair by the window. He looked better physically, but carried a contemplative expression I rarely saw on his face. "Ready to go home?" I asked, setting down the bag containing his medications and personal items. "More than ready," he confirmed. "Though I'm not looking forward to being an invalid." "You're not an invalid," I corrected him. "You're recovering." There's a difference. As we waited for the discharge paperwork, he surprised me by asking, "Was it this frustrating for you after your surgery?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I admitted. "Being dependent on others isn't easy, especially when you're used to handling everything yourself." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've never been good at accepting help." "I know," I said. "I inherited that from you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Along with my stubbornness, apparently." The wheelchair arrived with a nurse to escort us to the entrance where Walter waited with his car. As we drove to my parents' house, I noticed my father looking out the window with the expression of someone seeing familiar surroundings with new eyes. At home, my mother had arranged a brief welcome before excusing herself to an unmissable appointment. Left alone with my father and grandfather, I helped establish a comfortable recovery space in the downstairs guest room we had prepared. "You've thought of everything," my father observed as I organized his medications and set up a small table within reach of the bed. "I had a good teacher," I replied, glancing at Walter. When my father was settled, I decided it was time for the conversation we had been circling since his heart attack. "Dad, once you've had a chance to rest, I think we should talk about what happens next." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I think we should." 2 days later, with my father stable and settling into his recovery routine, I called a family meeting. My mother initially protested, claiming a scheduling conflict, but I was firm. "This is non-negotiable," I told her. "We need to talk as a family, and it needs to happen now." We gathered in the living room, my father in his armchair, my mother perched on the edge of the sofa, Walter standing by the fireplace, and me in the center feeling strangely empowered by the circumstances that had brought us to this point. "First," I began, "I want to be clear that I'm committed to helping with Dad's recovery. I've arranged to work remotely for the next 2 weeks and will be staying here to manage his care." My father nodded gratefully, while my mother murmured a thank you that sounded more obligatory than sincere. "But after that," I continued, my voice steady, "I'm moving to Seattle." The announcement landed with impact. My mother's head snapped up from her phone and my father leaned forward in his chair. "Seattle," he repeated. "Since when?" "I've been considering it for several months," I explained. "Diane's agency is opening a branch office there and she's offered me a senior position with a significant promotion. I accepted last week." "But your life is here," my mother protested. "Your apartment, your friends." "My life is wherever I choose to build it," I corrected her. "And after everything that's happened, I think a fresh start would be healthy for me." I reached into my pocket and removed a key, my childhood house key that I had carried for years. I placed it on the coffee table, the symbolic gesture not lost on anyone in the room. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I clarified. "I'm doing it because I need to prioritize my own well-being. The past 3 months have shown me that I've spent most of my life seeking approval and attention that was never going to come. That pattern ends now." "Molly," my father began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. "Is there anything we can do to change your mind?" I appreciated the question, which itself represented growth. "This isn't a negotiation," I explained gently. "It's a boundary. I'm sharing my decision with you out of respect, not seeking permission or trying to extract promises." Walter cleared his throat. "I have an announcement as well," he said. "I've decided to sell my house and move to Seattle too. My old teaching colleague has a rental property near Green Lake that would suit me perfectly." My parents stared at him in shock. "Dad, you can't be serious," my father protested. "You've lived here your entire life." Walter shrugged. "My life is where my family is," he said, simply looking at me. "My real family, the one that shows up." The words hung in the air, pointed but undeniable. My mother's eyes filled with tears that for once actually fell, smudging her perfect mascara. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice small. "You're both just leaving." "We're moving forward," I corrected her. "Whether that includes a relationship with you and Dad depends entirely on your choices going forward." I stood, signaling that the meeting had reached its conclusion. "I'll be here for the next 2 weeks. After that, I start my new life. You're welcome to be part of it, but only on new terms that include mutual respect, genuine interest, and showing up when it matters. As I left the room, I heard my father call my name softly. I paused in the doorway looking back at him. "I'm proud of you, Molly." He said the words unfamiliar on his lips. I should have said that more often. I nodded, accepting the small offering for what it was, a beginning perhaps, but far too little to change my course. 6 months after that family meeting, I settled into my Seattle apartment, enjoying the view of Elliott Bay from my small balcony. My promotion had come with challenges and opportunities that kept me engaged and growing professionally. More importantly, the distance from Portland had given me space to heal in ways I hadn't anticipated. My grandfather Walter had indeed followed through on his plan to relocate, finding a charming rental house just 15 minutes from my apartment. At 73, he had embraced the change with characteristic adaptability, joining a local history society and volunteering at the neighborhood library. We had dinner together every Sunday, a tradition we both cherished. As for my parents, the aftermath of my father's heart attack had prompted some initial changes. In the first month after I moved, they had made efforts to connect more meaningfully. My father called weekly asking questions about my work and life with newfound interest. My mother sent thoughtful housewarming gifts for my new apartment and made fewer comments about my career choices. But old patterns proved difficult to break. By the third month, my father had returned to work against medical advice, and my mother had resumed her packed showing schedule. Their calls became less frequent, their questions more superficial. When I invited them to visit for Thanksgiving, they declined, citing an unmissable opportunity to network with potential clients at a holiday charity event. "Are you disappointed?" Walter asked as we prepared our own Thanksgiving dinner in my apartment. I considered the question carefully while arranging place settings for the small group of friends who would be joining us. "Not really," I answered honestly. "I invited them because I wanted to leave the door open, not because I expected them to walk through it." He nodded, understanding as always. "That's growth, Molly, Doctor." Reed, with whom I continued therapy via video sessions, had helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own limitations, not my value. "You can love someone while acknowledging they're unable to give you what you need," she had explained. "And you can leave space for them to change without putting your life on hold waiting for it." These insights had freed me from the cycle of hope and disappointment that had characterized my relationship with my parents for years. I had stopped making excuses for them to friends or colleagues, answering questions about them honestly, but without bitterness. "We're not close, but we're working on defining a new relationship." On that December evening, 6 months after moving to Seattle, as I stood on my balcony watching the fairy lights glide across the darkening water, my phone chimed with a text from my father. "Your mother and I are considering a weekend in Seattle next month. Is that something you'd be open to?" I smiled slightly at the tentative phrasing, so different from the entitled expectations of the past. "I'd like that," I replied simply. "Let me know the dates and we can plan accordingly." Whether they would actually follow through remained to be seen. But the difference now was that their choice no longer determined my happiness or self-worth. I had built a life filled with meaningful work, genuine friendships, and the unwavering presence of the one family member who had always shown me what true support looked like. The doorbell rang, announcing Walter's arrival for our weekly dinner. As I welcomed him with a hug, I felt profound gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. The accident that nearly took my life had ultimately given me something more valuable: the courage to define family on my own terms. "How are you, sweetheart?" Walter asked, hanging his coat by the door. "I'm good," I replied, realizing I truly meant it. "Really good. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who consistently let you down? Did you struggle with feeling guilty about it, or did it bring you peace?" The hardest lessons often come from those closest to us, but sometimes those painful experiences lead us to the family we truly deserve, whether related by blood or chosen by heart. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about finding strength through family challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey, And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do both for yourself and others is to establish clear boundaries. Share your own experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. Every.